with these conversations, what I hear back is the burnout caused in leaders, not so much because they're working a lot, that's true, but a burnout because they realize that there's a lot of performance. There's a lot of doing things to meet the ROI, get the recognition, but it's not really filling their sense of authenticity of this is what I really believe or not. And when I started digging, it was this hyphenated experience. You want me to look at profit when I want to look at purpose. You want me to look at productivity when I want to look at the human impact. So the hyphen is not just culture or identity, it's also the pool that they're filling within the system.
Leadership today isn't just about giving direction or making decisions. It's about navigating complexity, embracing diversity and leading with authenticity and purpose, especially in a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. Leaders need to be more adaptable and inclusive than ever before. My guest today knows that the kind of leadership that truly transforms organisations and societies requires a deep understanding of human-centred values and a commitment to creating sustainable impact. It's about building teams where everyone belongs and unlocking potential across cultures and industries. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mercedes Martin. Mercedes is a visionary leader, the president and CEO of Mercedes Martin & Company, and a global inclusion practice strategist with Aperion Global. With over 30 years of experience coaching leaders across many industries and working with companies around the world, Mercedes specialises in helping leaders embrace purpose-driven leadership, lead authentically through disruption, and build inclusive, high-performing teams that thrive in complexity.
I'm just getting back from, I was in India.
I saw, yeah, how was the summit?
Oh my God, it was amazing. Yeah. It was, I think, believe what happened or what's going on, because I was in Colombia, in Medellin earlier in the summer. And now in India, it's leaving the US, given where we're at right now, and especially if I just stay with the topic of leadership and how we're having the conversations or introducing the conversations. Being in the global South, Latin America, and then Asia, India, was a very different experience than the energy and the conversations, obviously, that are happening here in the U.S. So it's very promising and very uplifting.
Could you say a bit more about that? Because one of the things I'm really enjoying about this podcast and talking to people is it's breaking me out of my echo chamber. So when you say it's a different experience, I'd love to hear a bit more about why exactly. How different is it?
Sure. For me, what I noticed in both, and I was there for similar reasons under the umbrella of my work in rewiring the leadership mindset for human-centered business transformation. All of that to mean that supporting leaders in making decisions that are both and profit and purpose, human-centered and innovation, and other things that they need to do. What in Latin America, the conversation was around the inner development goals. So what supports the sustainability development goals, the UN sustainability development goals that are systems, change in the areas of profit, people, peace, planet. In India, it was more granular, private enterprises, the IBMs, the BPs, the PwCs, McKinseys, you get it, and how they're practicing human-centered. What I noticed in both, and I'll throw in Africa in there as well, because we did some work earlier this year, not work, but presented at a conference in Zimbabwe. What I'm noticing is a different conversation. So that's the context. What I'm noticing is a different conversation, positioning themselves not in relation or not necessarily in alignment with the United States, but looking and exploring more on who are we as not only as a nation, but on a personal level as a leader from this part of the world. What is it that's natural for me? What is it that's authenticity for me as a leader, coming from? So in India, a lot of openness and a lot of integration of spiritual practices, a lot of integration and awareness on how their own culture informs their leadership, and what does that mean and questioning at this time. So to wrap it up, is I would say is how do we lead, not necessarily centering the US, but centering ourselves as a nation and as a culture.
So that's a real
And
deep personal and cultural sort of, what's our identity and how do we bring that into our leadership in a way that's true, and not just because we're forcing it, because we think it's going to get an outcome, but actually it's an authentic way of leading.
it's an authentic way of leading, and not to go too extreme in the poetic here, but it's also a way of remembering who we are and connecting these dots. So the conference in New Delhi was using their same spiritual metaphors, like the river and their own spiritual practices, and how it could inform their leadership. And not because we're going to get religious, but because spirituality is where your true authentic self, your why lives. So
Sure.
we explore how, without remembering that piece of yourself, that's how we end up with hollow strategies that are missing soul, your essence, your why.
And
We
what
end up with
what
policies. Mhm.
what's your role in that, Mercedes, when you're there saying we're having this conversation? Obviously, you've worked with some big organizations and organizations and also individuals. How do you even approach that conversation and facilitate that?
Asking questions, um, first of all, but also the questions that I'm asking. Well, first, I feel it's a great question, setting the context that I'm not importing wisdom from the US. I'm originally from Cuba, but raised here in the United States. So I live that. Um, I'll get to your question, but just more of a little bit of that context of why I feel that this work is important for me, and um, where I build a trust, as someone who, yes, identifies culturally as Cuban and raised in the US. I always felt this tension, internal tension, what I call living on a hyphen. Um, which culture pulls you, which identity pulls you. And that's one example for me, but I feel that everyone has multiple hyphens that we live through and calls us through to that edge, uh, that needs to be defined, needs to be thought through in order to be able to walk in this, earth, in your full authentic self. So that's how I bring this conversation, whether it's in the United States or outside in a global audience. Where are those what are those hyphens for you in this, at this time in this organization, and especially as you're leading this transformation? And through those questions and asking, what is it that you're leaving behind about yourself? Um, I'm coming about it because right now as I'm, traveling, the world really, and with these conversations, what I hear back, is the burnout cost and leaders, not so much because they're working a lot, that's true, but a burnout because they realize that there's a lot of performance There's a lot of doing things to meet the ROI, get the recognition, but it's not really feeling their sense of authenticity of this is what I really believe or not. And when I started digging, it was this hyphenated experience. You want me to look at profit when I want to look at purpose. You want me to look at productivity when I want to look at the human impact. So the hyphen is not just culture or identity, it's also the pool that they're feeling within the systems. It's all of it in one. And through that portal, I'm able to get to this conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. You've touched on a few things there. I'd like to just dig into the first one. You mentioned burnout. That comes up an awful lot in my coaching and in even within colleagues that I'm working with. And I think had a lot of conversations around burnout, and it really does make a difference whether the work that you're doing has value that you perceive and that is meaningful to you, because you can have an awful lot of pressure on you and not be feeling burnout because it's something that you love and you enjoy doing it and you feel it's giving you a sense of purpose. But you can also have less pressure but be really burned out because it's just not making sense, and you're just in that zone where you don't even want to maybe even get out of bed. So I guess what I'm interested in is advice both for individuals but also for organizations. So as an individual, how do you find your purpose? But as an organization, how do you make it align for your workforce and for your people? So I mean, where would you go? What sort of advice do you have on those questions?
Yeah, I would love to go there, but there's something that you said too that sparked for me. I say that the burnout, this level of disconnection in India, I heard as high as 80-90% of the workforce is feeling burned out and at the verge of need for mental health support. And I think that when I have these conversations, and especially in these circles, what's coming up is what I'm labeling as more of related to it's a lot of performance, but they're not fully present. And that takes a lot of energy, especially psychic energy. So I'm going with the route exactly like you're saying, but it's really not something that I'm connected with. I'm just performing, putting on the mask, putting on the armor, and inside I'm really disconnected and having a hard time. The work I feel and where I see the progress or the impact is at a team level, bringing this conversation. So yes, working with the C-suite, this is a transformation journey. How do you make it practical? I feel that we're also talking about topics and systems where there's a lot of complexity, and we don't need to make it more complicated with more frames, more frames and more tools and the 20 skills that you need to develop. I think that right now what we need is those spaces, safe and brave places where leaders can create the conditions for people to be able to build transformational relationships that are based on trust, where the team is able to be rewarded for their vulnerability. I have too much. I need to stop. I'm able to articulate my human needs without feeling that I'm going to be dinged because I'm not meeting the ROI or the productivity and so forth. So I'm looking, and what I'm introducing are the simple practices that help to address the complexity and the disconnect that folks are having at this time.
And I guess a big part of that is the psychological security for those individuals being able to be vulnerable, to be able to speak openly, ask questions, and bring new ideas forward as well.
Yeah, and a lot of times I feel we, and it might feel contradictory from what I just said, that, focus on the team, but it's a both and focus on the team and focus on the leader. I feel that we have not been able to move the needle as much as we want on the psychological safety. It's become in many places a buzzword, creating trusting relationships, the saying, because we have not worked with the leader to the depth and the depth that we need them to pick up a mirror. You can't align a team, a system, introduce a version or a vision for clarity, direction, when you yourself are confused, disoriented, and struggling a hyphen.
Yeah.
And I feel that a lot of that is true right now.
And I think we're talking about the team leader more so perhaps even than the senior leader in that conversation. It's got to be that direct support, that team leader, the sort of middle layer, often the frontline sort of managers who need to be able to do that, I feel.
Yeah, and I feel that that's a level, absolutely. I'm talking about that team leader at the different layers, but in particular, if we hone in on that middle manager, I feel that that's the hardest spot right now. Yeah. Because we're looking at, they're the ones, I call it the frozen middle, right? They're the ones who need to take this vision from the leadership and execute on it. So they're working the biggest tension, the biggest hyphen, and closing it as quickly as possible and at the same time as being human and saying the hard things in a compassionate way.
Hello, I have an update from Level Up. www.levelupleadership.uk is now the main hub for Level Up. You can still follow the podcast wherever you usually listen, and you can still connect and engage on LinkedIn. But Level Up Leadership, that's all one word, levelupleadership.uk will now be our central hub for all of our content. Head over there now and don't forget to follow so you never miss an article. Thanks. Now back to the episode. I think the biggest challenge, and here I'd love to know what you think about this, is a lot of the advice that we give is simpler when you've got a degree of stability, but more so all the time now, things are so complicated and changeable across all industries, certainly where I work and with people I'm coaching and the work they do. That sort of volatile uncertainty that is out there, it seems to get worse and more so all the time. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah. Interesting. I was going to share with you that where I went to study that phenomenon. Okay, what's coming up for leaders at this time with a level of uncertainty? Because, by the way, I'm very cautious of, as a leader, you need to do, you have to do, you needed to do that, condemning, because I feel like it's one of the toughest time in my 30 years in this work right now for leadership. And when you go back and look at the whole history of this where we find ourselves right now with this poly crisis, right? We haven't been able to recover from one, whether it's, you start with COVID or you start with the economic downfall in 2008. And a lot of times I don't feel we prepared, right? Leaders with the models, like you talk about, that bring out the VUCA, the volatility, the uncertainty, the chaos. A lot of the studies for me, a lot of this click actually from the UK, looking at leaders that had gone to boarding school. And this realization that there's a common experience for most in boarding school on that, showing that bravado. It might be the emotional isolation, but you don't talk about the vulnerabilities. It's part of what you navigate on your own as a way of survival. And in this study, what they did is that they looked at that experience that these leaders, and of course, predominantly male, in boarding school, and how that translated today in their leadership roles. And they all had senior leadership roles. So you saw the squashing the vulnerability, not only in themselves, but on what their teams, how their team was bringing up. And in their mind, that was a way of protecting the team. That was their way of bringing the confidence not only in themselves, but in their own, extending it to their own teams. So I question what is the equivalent of that experience across the border. We all have a story
Yeah.
that shapes that protective devices, and how is that showing up today, and especially in the style of leadership that we need to.
Yeah.
And that's where I talk about we need this is a new leadership psychology, right? How we think about leadership, because in the past that was correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
I sent you away to build that inner strength, cover up what the vulnerabilities, because leadership was based on command and control. And the more that you exhibited those qualities, the better leader you were perceived. And I feel like right now, and especially with technology and AI, what we see and we know is almost the opposite. I need you to bring your human centered, your human qualities that
Yeah.
the technology is not going to be able to address.
Well, that rings true to me and some mistakes that I made in my early career. And I'm happy to confess that when I first started on my journey into leadership, I thought that you had to be a tough boss. I thought that you didn't show emotion. You had to have the answers, and you had to be really decisive and forthright. And my first leadership experience was in retail, which is a very different environment to what I'm in now as well. And I look back now and I cringe a little bit. And it's okay. It was a journey, and I've 20 odd years later, I hope I've changed a lot and I'm a different guy. But that is a perception of what a leader might need to look like, this big, tough
Yeah.
guy who just gets the job done.
Yeah, yeah. I think that all of us, right, in this era, that was the message that we got. For me, it started clicking similar to you. I come from family where you just, tell it like it is, and buckle up, buddy, and deal with it. And I thought that was leadership, uh, being able to have that directness. At the same time, I wanted the conversation, right? The dialogue, the built up relationship, and so forth. So it was in my early years of the military. I was active duty career here in the US, where, and now I'm dating myself, TQM came about, total quality management.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was fascinating. And that's a lot of where the beginning of this, these thoughts and different perspective of leadership came up. When we were facilitating conversations on TQM and listening to soldiers, to higher ranking colonels and majors, and completely the opposite of what was the norm. So we use things like once you come into the class, you rank doesn't matter and this doesn't matter. But of course, that was just symbolic. You still had the same behaviors, the same expectation of I need to be tough. I need to be in command and control. I need to have all the answers, which is, I feel, the other one that's causing the burnout and a lot of this kind of. So that was my first experience on realizing that this was the expectation of leadership, but also that's already how we're wired in many ways. And I started looking at it, how it shows up differently, wherein I'm in South America, it's expected that a leader is going to have what I call that dictator archetype, because that's what I'm used to seeing in my in leadership and so forth. So it's been fascinating. And the hard, as you said, what's the recommendation is, I feel like the recommendation is how do you unwired to get rewired right in this direction. And I think that that's the hardest piece for to do right now.
So how would you start someone on that journey? And if I bring this back to a kind of a coaching and leadership conversation to maybe leave our listeners with a bit of advice they can take away, if they're not quite sure about their leadership style and they're not sure whether they've got they're dialed in terms of that approach, what's something they can go away and start doing or thinking about now to help get it right?
Yeah, the answer, what I found that gives easier access to leaders and teams for this type of conversation or transformation is to look back at their own narratives. What are the stories? Yes, I reinforce it with assessments and other tools, but I think that the dialogic, that having that dialogue first with yourself, where did these early messages around leadership come up? You'll be surprised, Lee, how many leaders I work with and they've never thought of A, how they define leadership, or B, how they even came into leadership, how they even shaped their definition and what they see as their role, their identity in leadership. So the first place that we start is excavating some of those leadership identity stories. Where did you get those experiences? Where did they come from? And then I package it into 5 practices, and I'm going to share them with you in order. But people, it doesn't matter. The order is pretty much. I like to say it's simple guidelines, simple practices and shifts for people to be able to stay on the journey, because that's the hardest. And the first one is that the self-awareness, but the self-awareness enough for me to pick up the mirror. Like I just shared, looking at stories and what is my role in this particular situation right now, and what messaging did I get from that? The second one is building those or creating those safe and brave places, starting for myself. A lot of times we're asking leaders to create the safety, the psychological safety has become, a big buzzword and, big goal. But a lot of times those leaders don't have that safety in themselves. And that's what I'm finding in particular right now in this environment where you have the, geo and social political polarization and crisis and so forth. They're expected to have all the answers, but they don't have the safe place to be able to have those conversations. By the way, I picked that up because many of them tell me that they rather do this work. When I finish these 5 shifts, you'll hear what the work is, in the company of strangers versus those in their own organization. So the social contract is so tied to how I show up that I'd rather do the work with people that don't know me than the accountability with those that do. And I thought that was fascinating in itself. Building the trusting relationships other than the transactional. So they really practice and go through their roster and their team. What is the level of the relationship with that team member? Is it just a transaction, or is there stuff that's in the way? Are there tensions? Are there hyphens that they're navigating that they don't agree? So all of those first 3 are more on that personal and interpersonal. And, we apply it at the individual as well as at the team and organizational level. So it's a systems component. Sure. The one that, and I saw this a lot, and especially in Latin America, where I spent this summer looking at the inner development goals, this need to really move away from just thinking short term to thinking the both and, the short and the long term, the infinite. That's where I talk about bringing in the indigenous practices of you're making decisions on what will happen how this decision today will impact the next 7 generations. But don't lose track. You need to do the both and. You need to look at what's happening on the day-to-day, as well as keep the eye on that long-term view. that one became really clear. I had a client who, a biotech, was really caught in this world in the middle of COVID. And they got so sidetracked on what was happening in the day to day. Are we going to go hybrid? Who's going to work from home? Who's going to be here? That they lost track of the long term vision, mission of this division. And today they're closed. They don't exist because all of the attention was going to that piece. I think that you're able to hold that both end when you're also doing your work and your inner compass is also settled. As another example of if you're disoriented, if you're confused, it's very hard for you to align and bring clarity to the rest of the team. And the last one that I talk about or encourage and the guidelines that they follow is how do you build networks, not just inside your organization, but also build those alliances, those partnerships external. We notice, right, that the more chaos, the more uncertainty, we go into silo. I'm working with a client that's exactly what's going on right now. There's so much going on that we go to self-preservation. That's where our brain takes us. So these guidelines and simple practices are a way to be able to connect everything from the inner system to the outer, broader system, and also calm down the nervous system to help you lead in this time of complexity.
I always love a good detailed plan. There's a 5-point action plan there, which I think anyone could take away. So that's really, that reflecting back on your own experience and what made you the leader you are today is a great starting place. Focusing on relationships, not just transactional relationships, but the depth of the relationship, creating those safe spaces within your teams, having that strategic look as well as sort of today's tasks. What's the long-term vision, and that networking? Who are my stakeholders and my partners? I mean, those 5 things are solid gold. If anyone can even just start working on those things, I think that's really great advice. So I appreciate that, Mercedes. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Mercedes, before I bring us to the close I always finish with the same question, but before then, I just wondered, how can people find out more about you or connect with you?
Yeah, sure. So we're actually in Sutra platform, where a lot of our work and our journeys are added. You can just write to me directly, Mercedes at mercedesmartin.co. And really looking forward to 2026. We'll be launching our Rewire leadership journey, as well as what I'm finding, you were asking me, in particular in the global South, these countries that I've traveled in the last couple of years, is a focus on how do we develop women leadership? How do we involve women and support in this transformation? So Buddha Diva, not because of the religious piece, but because of the spirit that the Buddha and the Diva bring together. Our retreats that we're facilitating for women that are leading organizations and are the change makers right now. So happy to share more on that and connect with your audience.
Fabulous. I'll share some of that in the show notes, so we'll make sure that gets out.
Yeah.
So my last question, Mercedes, I ask everyone the same question, as this is a leadership and coaching podcast. Who is a leader that you admire and why?
Okay. So I love this question. I just had a chance to go deeper with it in New Delhi, in India. Is the leader that I admire is AJ Parang. He was the CEO of MasterCard, and now he's the president of the World Bank. So I had an opportunity to consult with MasterCard Colombia while they were going through their fintech transformation. I worked with that team. And while I never met AJ in person as a CEO, it struck me that as a consultant, I was ready to come in with wish model, learn the model, learn this system and the ROI and what were going to be the KPI. But instead, I meet AJ through his communications with the organization, and it all focused on metaphor. He didn't start with where the business was and even where the business needed to go, but he started more with talking to people about their soul, talking what was their why, what was the deepest and important. So the conversation that we had earlier, he talked about rivers, and I use the river metaphor as a transformation. There's something that takes you down a flow. Sometimes there's a swirl. Sometimes you have to go around the rock, but it helps you stay in your path. But one of the things that you learn, with a river is that you never force it. You can't force things. You got to go with the flow. So for that reason, AJ has been my leadership, in particular in this conversation. Now, as head of the World Bank, I also find that flexibility. I also find that human-centered piece that we talked about is different. So his whole agenda in the World Bank now is to look at poverty and sustainability and the climate change and bring those two together, which has never been done before. So it's the courage, but it's also the simplicity of bringing it back to the human-centered approach to the work and being successful at it.
Well, hearing you describe, I don't know AJ prior to this conversation, but hearing you describe the use of metaphors, that human connection, I think it's no surprise that resonates with everything that you identify in yourself and what you hold important. So that's a great answer. Thank you. Thank you, Mercedes. Well, I'm really grateful for your time, especially dialing in so early as it is for you in Alaska this morning. So thank you for being a guest on the podcast today.
No, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for bringing this work to the world. We need more of you and more of these messages coming out right now of leadership. So it was a pleasure and looking forward to continue the conversation.
So that was Mercedes Martin. I think my biggest takeaway from that conversation was that really practical 5-point plan, which is designed to help leaders coach themselves to improve their own leadership style. Starting with relationships, partners, stakeholders, a little bit of reflection about what's led you to where you are today, and importantly, about valuing relationships above transactions. It's something that you can use with yourself, or if you're a coach, you can help guide others through. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoyed speaking to Mercedes. If you enjoyed it, I'm sure your colleagues will too, so please share the podcast widely. As always, until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep leveling up.